Basically who I am and share all of those ingredients with you. So the oven was preheated back in what year was I born? 57? In Beaver Dam, Wisconsin.
Don't ask me.
Two parents. And my parents are both alive. Those of you that know what I'm going through is my mom is currently in hospice and probably will not make it through the day today. But anyway, they are still both alive, and I have two brothers. A brother, I'm the oldest of three. Eric is 3 years younger, and he is head of marketing of DuPont and travels the world. And my younger brother is 10 years younger than I am, and he's a captain, went through the Air Force Academy, has been flying reserves, and is also a pilot with Delta. And so my brothers are currently with my mom in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, which is where I was born. And believe it or not, there's a sign outside Beaver Dam that says, "Welcome to Beaver Dam, home of 14,000 busy beavers." So anyway, I'm sort of a mixture of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and California. So my love of travel, and I've shared that with a lot of you, actually started when I was 15. I started working, my dad was a private practice optometrist, and when he also then started a veal barn as a sort of a side business, and because he couldn't find any decent employees, I started working for my dad when I was 13, feeding the calves at 4 in the morning, which I think is the beginning of my early mornings, and then I'd take the bus home and feed the calves at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I started working when I was 13. When I was 15, I went to Europe with a church group, and that was sort of the beginning of my love of travel. So when I graduated, I packed up my car and moved to California. Just packed it all up. I was just over 17 and decided I wanted to live in California. So the summer that I moved out there, I worked for Camp Bloomfield, which was a summer camp for the junior blind. And I thought at that time that my career goals were going to be working with the blind. And I think that was probably sort of a residue of my dad being an optometrist. So that summer that I was a lifeguard, and taught swimming not only to blind kids, but they added deaf kids that summer. And so that is where my interest sort of shifted to the hearing impaired. And I continued on in college at Long Beach and got my Bachelor's of Science degree in what they call communicative disorders. So at that time I was interested in hearing, still not really knowing what I wanted to do. 2 years, although in between my bachelor's degree, I put everything in storage and I went to Europe and the Middle East for a year. I bought a one-way ticket to Athens, didn't know what I was going to do, traveled, met people, then bought a one-way ticket to Tel Aviv, and then ended up working in a kibbutz for 4 months. Met a guy there, he was training for the Olympics, then went and lived in Paris for 4 months. And so my love of travel sort of started when I was 20 years old, and has continued to date. But anyway, then I came back and I finished my bachelor's degree, decided that California was not the place that I wanted to live permanently, so I came back home. I started graduate studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, decided that was a little too research-oriented for me, so I lived in Madison, commuted to Oshkosh, and finished my master's degree in audiology in Oshkosh. At that time, then, actually I was working at that time through my master's program for Benson Optical in Madison, and they hired me to run their hearing aid program. For those of you that remember Benson's, it's no longer in existence.
That was locally based here.
It was a wholesale optical company, but they sold hearing aids for a long time. And so when I finished my master's, they moved me to Minneapolis, and I ran the hearing aid program nationally for Benson Optical for several years until their demise. I don't remember what year that they went into Chapter 11 and eventually folded. So then I worked for a company called Ensonic, which was one of the very first programmable hearing aid companies. This is at the time that 3M was also making product. And I was a district sales manager, and so I traveled 15 states and Canada. So again, I was on the road full time and absolutely loved it. And this is just shortly before I got married in 1992. So I met my husband, Thomas, 2 years prior to that, so it must be 1990, at LifeSpring. So I don't know if any of you remember hearing. LifeSpring was sort of a personal effectiveness training. It was like a 5-day program, sort of a derivative of EST, or, which is, so I had gone through this training, met my husband, and we got married in 1992. My daughter Angela, who those of you that were here for her presentation, was born in 1993. And when I was pregnant with her, I realized that I could no longer be on the road. I mean, that wasn't too conducive to family life and being pregnant. So I have a colleague named Dr. Charlie Stone, who has some private practice audiology clinics here in the Twin Cities. And so I worked for Charlie. And Angela was born in 1992, and Alec, my son, was born in 1993. So that makes Alec now a senior in high school at St. Thomas Academy, and my daughter is at Normandale, in her first year in Normandale. And so Thomas and I got married, and we've lived in Richfield, we've lived in Prior Lake, we've lived in Chanhassen, and now more recently we've moved in Mendota Heights to be closer to St. Thomas Academy. So I worked for Dr. Charlie Stone. His company was called Allied Hearing Services for about, it must be 10 years. He sold the practice to a national organization, which wasn't to my liking. I, during that time, was going back to school to complete my Doctor of Audiology degree. For a long time, audiology was a master's level profession, and then within the last probably 7-8 years, it is now a doctoral level profession. It's no longer a master's level profession. But there was a window of time where those of us that were practicing, we were not grandfathered in, but we were able to take all of our coursework online. So through the school, the Kirksville School of Osteopathic Medicine, I completed my Doctor of Audiology degree, and obtained that in 2002, which then I said, okay, it's time to do this for myself. My colleague Charlie had sold his practice to a national organization, so I just opened up my practice 1 mile south from where I was before, and basically the referring physicians and everyone sort of followed me, and I had a really good start to my practice. So I opened up the doors of Audiology Concepts in 2002 at 7450 France, right above Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, if anyone knows where that building is. Started out with 2 of us. Currently there are nine employees in my practice. But the year later, in 2003, my son Alec, who at that time was about 7, we went to a concert at Grace Church, and we all left early because it was too loud. And he walked into the parking lot and he said, "Mom, my ears are ringing." And so for those of you that know what that is, that's called tinnitus or tinnitus. So I thought, man, as his mom and as an audiologist, I need to know what to do with this. And so that year I opened up a second company called the Tinnitus and Hyperacusis Clinic. So but basically my specialty is not only hearing, but is also tinnitus. And so we're housed in the same, basically the same company, but it's 2 separate companies. And I have people travel from all over the world to see us because there's not too many people that work with this specialty. And so I'm sure though some of you know people, or maybe does anyone here have tinnitus? Ringing in their ears? No? No? Because it's very common. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to bother people, but it's yeah, for some people it does. So that was 10 years ago. This year, or 3 years ago, we basically outgrew the space at 7450 France, and so I bought a building down the road at 6444 Xerxes, which is a duplex house. If anyone driving down Xerxes probably drives by it every day. It used to be a chiropractor office and a residence. And so we bought the building, basically gutted it, rezoned it, and Edina loved that because they, quadrupled the taxes. But we gutted it, and it's turned into quite a lovely, lovely office, and we've been there now 3.5 years. 2 years ago, I also added an office in Burnsville, so we now have 2 locations and a staff of 9.
Where's it at?
Right next to Quello Clinic in the Rich Point Medical Building. Do you know it?
I live in Burnsville. I go by there all the time.
Yeah.
Doctor's appointments, babies, all that stuff.
Yeah, Edina Eye is in that building too. Yeah, and they got a pediatric clinic right above that. Yeah, so we're right down the hall. So the career path has been wonderful and fruitful. You know, what years ago a wise woman said, if you put your faith first, your family second, and your career third, everything will be in line. And I think that that's what we have done successfully. The only thing I will add is the spice to the recipe. Some of the little nuances about myself is some of the seasonings of my life are fishing. I love to garden. I do canning. Cabin life. We have a cabin on Lake Chaminade just south of Motley, which is really our love. I am an early morning person. My clock goes off at 4:10. I've been going to the YMCA ever since I've lived in Minneapolis, so since 1986. I've been at the Y at 5 in the morning, and I'm at my office by 7. So definitely a morning person, not much of a late person. Socially, I'm pretty inept at night. I'm a beekeeper. We are in our second year of beekeeping at the cabin. Don't have a lot of honey yet. We're still working on that. I think that we need to move the bees to Mendota Heights. I think there's not enough forage up at the lake. They're doing okay, but not enough for us to have extra. Obviously, I love to travel. I've been to I've counted over 25 countries in the world, and I'm always looking for. I don't do a lot of local conferences, but I search out the international conferences, which gives me a reason to travel. As many of you know, I'm going to be a part of the Rotary Friendship trip to India in February. Looking forward to that. And as Justin did, what's the one thing is that I will tell you, I have never found a food too hot for me, and I'm always in search of it. So I love hot food, and I keep searching out something that I can eat, and I haven't found it yet.
You're going to the right place to test that.
Yeah. So then I asked my husband about what traits how would you describe me? So he says you stir the recipe well with a side of tenacity, strong-willedness, pig-headedness, and an uncompromising commitment to excel in everything I do. So, thank you. Yeah.
Do you make earplugs in your practice?
Yep.
They're hard to come by.
You know, when you look at the field of audiology, it's changing. I mean, as when I started almost 27 years ago, we looked at, it was audiology and hearing aid dealers, the hotel kind of dealers. And now we compete with, ENT practices, we compete with internet sales, we compete with Costco, we compete with the chains, the manufacturers are now getting into the distribution of product, and so it's really become a conundrum of confusion for the public. And in my practice, we're all about service and top-of-the-line product, but we're also about not talking about hearing loss and hearing aids and all of this weakness, which goes along with those words, but what people can do to keep their hearing at its best, which should be done routinely throughout life. And devices are sometimes just a part of that, but so is hearing protection, so is hunting protection, so is the whole thing. Because when you think about it, hearing isn't even on people's radar. If you sit in an airport, look around you, everyone is using their ears. They have earbuds in, they have their phones up to their ears, they're carrying on a conversation. We use our hearing for everything, but yet people don't even think about it until it's too late. And so our doctors of audiology are sort of working on this paradigm shift to be looking at let's not address the issue when it's too late, but let's start getting people to be aware of their hearing, whether it's a baseline hearing exam, as a younger person, even though you think it's normal, but to keep it that way also. And so that's sort of what we're trying to focus on, not just the product. Yeah.
What was the one place that you have enjoyed traveling to more than any other?
Oh, wow. I love Reykjavik.
Hey.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what about it that?
Well, geologically, if you're interested in any of that, that's fascinating. And the other one is Tibet. I went to Tibet, to Lhasa, was it Lhasa? And there were a group of 36 of us that went, and you know the altitude is super high. I was only one of 3 people that did not get altitude sickness on that trip. You know you're in trouble when you get to the hotel and they've got an MD on staff and big red buttons by the bed, SOS buttons in the toilet.
Oh.
Yeah, because of the altitude. So it's really it's an interesting place to be. So those are, yeah.
In a world that's so loud, how do you help guide your children to make good choices about noise?
You just have to keep talking. I don't know, because my kids are pretty good. You know, Alex still has tinnitus from that one-time exposure. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, he shows to have normal hearing, but something happened that night. You know, we don't know. But you just have to keep talking to him. You know, and on, for example, on iPods, there's a parent limiter. You know, that you can get into the software and you can limit it.
Is there a certain decibel level?
Well, 85 decibels is considered the safe, but that's pretty loud.
Yeah.
You know, but that's sort of what's considered safe. OSHA's formula is very complex. You know, they look at your noise exposure over a 24-hour period of time. So, you know, if you go to a Twins game and then listen to music and then you mow the lawn, but it's all very, you know, complex.
And then, what percentage of your patients that come in are concussion referrals versus just?
None really. Don't do a lot of workman's comp. Some, but not a lot. But what's also interesting is my patients are now younger. I mean, I will tell you, 10, 15 years ago, my patients were 80, 90. Now my patients are 50s. They're starting in their 50s.
Sure.
And I think we don't believe there's more hearing loss, but baby boomers are less tolerant of missing. If they're sitting in a meeting and they miss it, they go, okay, let's just go take care of this. Unlike the previous generation that's pretty resistant to, addressing it. They go, I'll get by. Well, if you want to get by, that's fine, but, yeah.
I think about the noise at some of these events, especially in the Metro, when you go to a Viking game there. And personally, I can't tolerate that because it's, and I deliberately don't go simply because of that. But I think back, 50 years ago when we had Memorial Stadium at the U and we had the Met Stadium. Everything, there's a much different setting for that type of thing.
Right.
I don't know if you see or hear complaints about that, or
Absolutely.
Or,
I should go
you
stand
could
on
probably
earplugs.
prospect at the door.
I should. And you can get an app that's a sound level meter, which I have
right?
on my phone. I use it at the Y, and it's not accurate, but it gives you an idea. My church is too loud. I'm a member of Wooddale, and then it's too loud. It's
Yeah.
just, everything's too loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm the audiologist in the back, and not at church, but at the Y, just saying, turn it down, you guys.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because my husband, this is all about hearing loss now. My husband has a hearing loss and he wears hearing aids most of the time, but he also likes to wear his earbuds. And when he puts them in, I can hear them across the room. And the question is, how much additional damage is that doing?
You still can.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he's got hearing loss, which is why it's higher, but he can still do something called improvement, he'll have more hearing loss. And the good news is he should be doing Bluetooth. Everything now has Bluetooth. So then you can stream music and everything else through the device. Keep the level low. Yeah.
Different, but changing gears. You work at the deal bar as a kid, feeding the calves every day. Did you find it hard to know they were going to be slaughtered pretty soon?
No, because by the time you ship them out, they're bigger and bigger and mean. And I don't know if Bill's still done the same, because I was 14, I'm 54, so that was a long time ago. I don't know, I would assume the operation's still the same. But yeah, they come in little and they're cute, but then by the time they're shipped out, they're big and mean. It's just, I just looked at it, it's farming. I learned how to work. Wish I could teach my kids to
You
do
were
that.
busy as a weaver.
Yeah.
There you go.
Victor wasn't here, I had to step in.
That's right.